Were you aware that 1 in every 310 of girls will get pregnant before they graduate high school? And did you also know that 1 in 4 teenagers will contract a sexually transmitted disease every year? In almost every state, legislators are deciding to remove important information about sexual education from the school system, as it's not a prevalent topic for teenagers. We, as teenagers, should have been taught that sex is a very forbidding and ominous topic, when in reality, we as adults and educators have to accept the fact that students are engaging in sexual activity. Rather than ignoring the topic altogether or only expressing thoughts of abstinence, public school systems should provide a safe place in an educational class to help students understand these types of sexual education. According to Education Week, talking and discussing about sexual education is an uncomfortable topic, and nobody's denying that. But the consequences for not talking about it outnumber the positive repercussions of discussing sexual topics. Age-appropriate sexual education taught by properly trained teachers is needed and should be required in all public schools for the sole reason that a lot of teenagers are engaging in sexual activity. By discussing and making the topic more open, teenagers can fully understand the different subtopics involved in sexual education. Now, according to NBC News, kids are becoming more sexually active at a much earlier age. 66% of American high school students have had sex by their senior year. And these same kids are deciding to pay the price by contracting dangerous and sometimes deadly sexually transmitted disease. Somewhere along these lines, there's a disconnect between these teenagers and the proper sexual education. NBC brings up the point that it would be much more beneficial to a student to learn from proper sex educators and not their friends from the back of a school bus. This study, also conducted by NBC, also encompasses the fact that abstinence-only programs are less effective because there's a fundamental flaw in teaching children only about the negative of sex. Now, according to CNN, too many parents are living in this sort of fantasy world, and one in which they believe that their birds and bees talk is totally sufficient for their child. Whether it's safe sex practices or even abstinence, all these issues must be dealt with in an educational setting, because when we look at teen pregnancy rates, sexually transmitted disease, including HIV/AIDS, it only makes sense to have as much education as possible rather than leave people guessing. Encouraging the discussion of safe sex only helps a student, and sometimes a parent is unable to fulfill their needs and questions. Now, according to a nonprofit called Advocates for Youth, the federal government has invested more than $1.5 billion for abstinence-only programs, which have proven ineffective, which censor or include important information that could help young people protect their health. Researchers, a part of Advocate for Youth, study the National Survey of Family Growth to determine the impact of sexual education on youth sexual risk-taking for young people ages 15 through 19, and found that teens who received comprehensive sex education were 50% less likely to experience pregnancy than those who received abstinence-only education. Understanding that sexual education will not necessarily hinder students from engaging in sex, but having students and teenagers understanding the safest way to engage in sex is a mission that needs to be accomplished. Now, sex is not necessarily a negative thing. Without it, you would not be able to be listening to me speak, nor would I be able to be speaking to you. But by implementing sexual education courses, the burden and shaming of talking about sex can be greatly reduced, and teenage pregnancy rates and STD rates will also be significantly lower. Even though the topic has the ability to be awkward, scary, and confusing, the only way to truly understand it is by talking about it. By learning at a young age, the chance of unwanted outcomes will go down. Now, today we talked about sexual education and why it's needed in the public school system. Understanding why we need it is crucial to the succession of its presence. Now, schools cannot continue not teaching sex. Americans need to understand that times are changing, and the teachings of safe sex is absolutely needed in this generation. I would much rather have to sit in a classroom and discuss safe sex procedures than have most of my fellow classmates be teenage parents.